today's video we're going to go over how to update data in Firebase as well as delete data in Firebase. So let me show you what it'll look like when we're done. You'll see we have this trip for Argentina with $400 as our budget. If we go into the trip here in the details, you'll see we have 400 here, and we can change this to maybe 350. And if we hit submit, you'll see it's updated here as 350 as well as back in this page. Let's say this trip maybe is we're no longer going to go on this trip to Bali. Unfortunately, it's not going to work out, so we can just delete it. If we hit delete there, we're back on the main page and we only have our one trip to Argentina. All right, let's get started. All right, so we're in our trip detail view here, and the first thing we're going to do is actually add that text field so that we could edit the budget. So in the code over here, first thing, let's add a new variable, which is going to be a text editing controller. All right, now scroll down all the way to the bottom, and this is where we're building the actual bottom sheet that's popping up. And we did that in the last video, so continuing on from that, let's just go ahead and add that text editing, or let's add that text field. So create a new row here. Well, the first thing we would add is a text field, right? So if we add our text field, you'll notice when we try and run the app though, this is going to actually cause some problems. The reason for this is because the text field, if you look in the errors, the text field doesn't really know the size. So to fix this, we can pretty much just wrap this in a expanded widget. And if we're actually gonna have to rerun the app, not just the hot reload, but if you rerun the app and go in and hit edit, you'll see now we have a text field right there. All right, so that's decent so far, but if you remember in other parts of the app, when you're creating a new trip and you get to the part where you put the budget in, we already have this kind of nice styled out widget for pretty much I guess it would be like a money widget. So that's in our create trip budget view. I'm gonna show you how we can reuse that code on not just the trip page, but also on this page that we're currently dealing with, which is this detailed trip view. All right, so in the budget view itself, we do already have this as a widget. So you can see it's called generate text field, and this is at the very bottom, and that is generating this, and basically it takes two parameters, which one is a controller and one is the helper text. The helper text is just what is written down here. So we're actually going to move this into a file of its own. So we can comment this out for now, so we'll get the errors. Actually copy it first, then comment it out. And then we'll get the errors that we're going to have to fix in this file itself. So go ahead and we do have a folder called widgets now that we have started putting our custom widgets in. So create a new Dart file here, and we're going to call the money text field. All right, so in this file here, we're going to import material, and then we're also going to need to import services, and that's because we are using services in this widget specifically, which is for this whitelisting text formatter. So up in here, you can actually remove services. This is the budget view. So back in the text, this new file, which is the money text field, we can create this new class now, and we're going to call it the money text field, and this is actually going to extend a stateless widget. All right, so that now creates us a widget called money text field, and it has all the properties of a stateless widget. That's what the extends is doing here. So this, if you actually can paste down the widget that we had, and we're going to kind of build it now within here. This takes the two parameters here, so let's go ahead and add those as variables in this widget class, and they're both going to be final variables. The first one, which will be the controller, is actually going to be a text editing controller. So call that a controller like that. The second one is just a string. We'll keep it named helper text. All right, so to initialize these two variables, we actually can use this, which pretty much what this is saying is that when we create a new instance of money text field, we are giving it, the controller and the helper are required fields. Now the next thing is to actually override the build method of our widget here. So this is where we actually can create the content that we want. Now, you'll see kind of this line already is been taken care of up there with the new variables there. And now this widget right here, final text, which is normally what we used to return, is basically what we are going to return, but we don't need to call it that anymore. So if you just copy all of this stuff, including the padding, that is what we are going to return in this widget. So if you save that, now this money text field widget is accessible as a reusable widget outside of the budget view. So it's not restricted to just the budget view. So you can see where we used to be calling generate text field, we can now call money text field. You'll notice the error, we get an error. Firstly, we need to call controller here, and we need to call helper text. But we also need to import that new package right there. All right, so now you can see that this line that we already updated works. So we can change the rest of them that are erroring out to follow that format. All right, so now these are all set up. We can actually just go ahead and delete the commented out code down here. If we were to rerun our app, you'll see you can still add a new trip with no problem. So if you go through this and type in, anything here, everything is fine, which means our refactor worked correctly. So now we have that, we can actually go ahead and import this money text field into our trip details. Down at the very bottom here, as what we were doing before, the text field here can now be a money text field, and then we will give it a controller, which is going to be our budget controller that we defined at the beginning, and then it will need the helper text, which is going to be just budget. All right, so if you save that and you go into one of these and hit edit, you can see we now have that nicely displayed money formatted text field. On this money text field, the budget controller here is not setting our budget, so we need to go ahead and set that. To do that, we actually need to change our detail trip view to be a stateful widget instead of the stateless widget. So go ahead and do that conversion with the built-in operator there. Now the first thing we will need to do after that, basically when we instantiate this trip detail view, we want to set the state of that budget controller text to be the actual budget of this trip. So this is pretty easy to do. We've done it before. All we need to set here is void. We need to call init state, and then call super here init state, and then we're gonna actually do our override now, which will be we're gonna set the budget controller text to equal the widget, because now this is stateful, so the trip budget, like that. We need to call widget first because of the statefulness. That's what I was trying to say. Anyway, this needs to be toString, and we're going to do a toString as fixed int of 0 because we want to just display the amount without the decimal points. If you want to show the cents as well, you can do 2, but I'm going to leave it 0. Rerun that, and now you'll see we do get that 600 value there. All right, so now we can actually get to updating that $600 amount. So very far down at the bottom here where we have this row, let's create another row and just create a button in that, and that button will be to actually update Firebase. So in here, we're going to have a raised button, and we can just give it some text that says submit. So a few properties on this button real quick. All right, so I just centered the button and changed the color. Pretty simple there. So I also added this on pressed asynchronously because we are going to be making a call to Firebase. So first, let's go ahead and create a new future function that will actually update Firebase. All right, so right down here, after basically one bracket up, we want to create a new future. Just a future, that's what this is going to return, and we're going to call this update the trip. So this is going to need the context, and that will be the context of our view. And then again, this is going to be asynchronous. The reason we need the context is because we need to actually get the user's ID so that we can find this actual specific trip for this user. So first let's get that user ID and set it as a variable called UUID. And this is going to be, we're going to need to await this because we're going to make a call to Firebase. So we're going to use our provider here of this context, so of the current view, and then we can call auth. And then we already have a method set up called getCurrentUID, so just use that. This stuff, all of this stuff right here has been set up in another video. So if you don't really have users signed in yet, but you just want to update something in Firebase, you can still do that. This is just going to get us a specific document. So, all right, just as a reminder, the way our data is structured in Firebase is our highest level collection is called user data. Then each document inside of user data is actually the user's UID. So these are documents. Inside these documents, we have another collection called trips. And then inside that trips collection, we will have documents for each of the trips. So this represents one actual trip. Let's actually find that document right now. Let's set actually first a collection. We can call Firestore instance. And then we can call the collection of, our highest level collection is actually called user data. So we're going to go there first. And then inside that, we're going to have a document which is going to be titled by that UID. So I'll put that right here. Actually, this only needs one U. And then inside that user's document, there's actually another collection, which is called trips. Trips. And then inside the trips there is going to be another document, actually. And this document is going to be the specific trip that we're on, which we'll know by actually the current widget.trip. We keep the document ID saved on that trip object, which real quick again is if you go up to your model and you go up to your trip, you'll see we do have the document ID saved there. This might be a little bit confusing for if you're just jumping into this video now, but basically what this line right here is doing for the collection is just getting a Firebase instance of any type of collection and data that you have. So depending on what your data structure is, you just need to fill that in right here to get to the specific document that you want to update. So that's all that's actually doing. Now we can actually make the call to do the update. So here we can call return, and we can await, and we can do we can call this document. Let's just call it doc. This is going to be what we're actually updating, is that document. So here we're going to call doc.set data, and now we can pass it the actual trip data here. So this widget, we can pass it this trip object here, and we have already that to JSON method that will basically convert it to JSON to be updated to Firebase. So this is very similar to how we actually create our trip, if you remember. This is almost exactly the same thing. The only difference is we're calling set data instead of add. So, and we have to give it the actual document that we want. So right now, if you were to do this and run everything and basically call, I don't think we're doing this yet. We need to call this update trip in this asynchronous function here. So call update trip and just give it the context, and that will be good. Now, the other thing, we're actually going to want to await on this. And then once we're done with that, we're going to actually pop the view because it'll be saved. This isn't really going to do much right now, because if you'll notice, if you rerun this and you change something here. So if you change this to 222 and hit submit, you'll notice nothing changed, right? Our price didn't change. Our text did stay the same though here, our text field, but Firebase was not updated. Now, the reason for that is because we're updating this based on the trip object. right here, but we aren't actually updating the trip object before we hit submit. We just need to call widget.trip budget and then set that equal to and again, this is going to be equal to that budget controller text, because you'll notice right now the budget controller text is still equal to 222, so that is the value that we want. So just set this equal to the budget controller dot text, and since this is actually we need this to be saved as a double, we need to just use double.parse, and then we can give it that text item. All right, so at this point, if we were to rerun it, I'll show you because it is a bit interesting. If you go back to the main trip, this $600 one, you click on it and you change this to 222 and hit submit. You notice right here, this did not update to 222, but if you go back, this is actually updated to 222 because it is actually updated in Firebase now. And if you click into this again, it will be updated there. So the only thing we need to do is actually update this version of it, this displayed version of it, instead of, because pretty much the way we have this set up now is we're pulling the Firebase data out here, and then when we click on this is actually just kind of a local version of the data. So this is not pulling from Firebase, and that's why if we change this to a different number, it isn't changed here because this is pretty much a localized instance to this view. Hopefully that makes sense. But we can quickly, or relatively quickly, change this just by making this value here hold state. So we just need to give it, we just need to create a new variable and then use that variable and basically update that variable. You might be thinking, why don't we just pull this data from Firebase directly? And you could do that, but it is just going to require an extra call to Firebase. So it's not, you want to be thinking of like cost and like keeping your data exchange as low as possible. So while it's not wrong, it is a slightly worse way to do it, I think. But yeah, so anyway, create a new variable here and call it budget. And then this budget variable can now hold state. So in our init state here, we're actually going to set this equal to the widget.trip.budget, and then actually also call to floor on this because we want to keep it without the decimal point. So now we're going to use this budget anytime we've been calling widget.trip.budget. If you actually search this file for widget trip budget, we're not going to do it on that one right there, but look through the file and you'll see right here is actually where the budget is there. So this is in our total budget card. So we can actually just replace this. We don't need to call floor anymore because we're calling that above, and that should be good. There is one other spot where we're calculating this total. You'll notice this is null right now. That's fine. We can also change that. And then last thing that we want to do is in this on press button where we're adding where we're making that update called Firebase. We can set the state of this variable to equal this trip title budget, which is essentially we're just setting it equal to the change that was made. You need to actually just rerun the app now, and the reason for that is because basically we lost the state of that page that we were in. But regardless, if you change this, so 444 now, and hit submit, you'll see it's updated here. This one was not called on the floor, so actually call floor here. And then if you change it again, you'll see it's changed here. It's also changed out here. All right, great. So now we're able to edit data in Firebase. I'm only really gonna cover, I think, just this one, updating the budget here. But now that you see how it's done, you can imagine basically creating more fields in here of stuff you want to edit. I think another thing that would be good to edit is maybe the time of the trip. Also, if you remember, we were creating the budget in a simple budget and a more complex budget. You could add those fields as well. I don't think it makes sense to actually edit where the trip is. Instead, I think we'll implement a delete action and just delete the whole trip. Go ahead and actually just copy. Let's create this method here that will actually delete it. So go ahead and copy this update trip future function, and instead let's just call it delete. This is very similar because basically we're going to find the same document, and then we're going to, instead of calling set data on it, we're just going to call delete. And that is pretty much all you'll need to do in terms of like calling delete to Firebase. So now we just need to create a button for that. So I'm actually just going to copy this entire row, which has the button above, or which has the submit button, and then just modify it. So instead of submit, we can say delete. Let's go ahead and make this red. White I think is probably fine. On pressed, we're not going to need to set any of this state. We can just await. We can await the delete trip, and then we're actually going to want to navigate back to our home screen. All right, let's try doing the route like this: push named and remove until, and then give it that home route. Click this $300 one, hit delete. You'll see that works now. We can delete this last one. And now you'll see we have no trips. All right. That pretty much wraps this up about editing and deleting in Firebase. So I think that is pretty much a good place to stop. If you haven't already and you do enjoy the videos, please consider subscribing. All right, ciao for now.